Well, I can just say a little bit. I know that certainly the relationship that Venezuela has with Colombia is similar in some senses to what the relationship it has with most countries in the hemisphere, which is a cordial relationship, and they try to cooperate in areas that they can cooperate together on. Particularly, Chavez has tried to work very hard with Uribe on the border patrols, especially because Colombia, as most of you probably know, has a large amount of drugs coming out of it. Venezuela in the past, and still today, is a transit point. The drugs come through Venezuela, they go out to Europe, US, etc. And I think Venezuela has taken a very important stance on that, in the sense that they're really trying to stop that. And so the Border Patrol, the recent, what is coined as arms purchases in the press by Venezuela in the last few years, are actually border patrolling equipment like helicopters, etc., to cooperate in that struggle against narco trafficking. That's the most important relationship, I think, that they have with Colombia, and have also, turned over rebel leaders who are implicated in the narco trafficking trade when they come into Venezuelan territory. So the idea that we always hear that Venezuela doesn't cooperate in that area is really not true, and certainly is doing that with Colombia. As far as other relations, I think that's the most important one as far as how they cooperate. As far as everything else, I think that Venezuela respects international treaties, etc., and relates to Colombia in that way.
You probably know that Citgo is providing discounted oil during the winter months in many parts of the country to poor people, in Alaska, parts of New York State, Boston. We tried to get them to come to St. Louis, and they were willing to do it if we could get one of the local politicians, and it's mostly Democrats, to endorse it. We couldn't get that, right? I mean, it's really kind of sad in that respect. And I think what's important, perhaps, is to be ready to explain to people that this commitment, Venezuelans, Hugo Chavez doesn't want Citgo to do this simply because Hugo Chavez thinks he's going to win an election in the United States. I mean, it really is, I think, part of his personal philosophy. I mean, some of it's diplomacy. We shouldn't be shocked. I can't imagine an American foreign aid program having any political strings attached, could you? This one doesn't have strings attached. That's the amazing thing. And so I think in that respect, Citgo is going to be able to sell its oil. I think you have to watch out, though, when somebody decides to criticize Citgo, or to say, well, they're just doing this because they want to embarrass us, or they want to embarrass the Bush administration, which seems to me to be beyond embarrassment, but, or they want to, or they're in some sense trying to gain leverage unfairly within the United States. So I think in some ways being politically aware and conscious of the program, and how Citgo, when Katrina happened, Citgo immediately, Venezuela immediately offered aid and support, and delivered. And whatever the motives are, I think that's worth supporting. And so keep your eyes open when politicians or newspaper editorialists say something about this program as being only politically motivated. I don't care if it is politically motivated. I wish our government were so politically motivated.
Someone, a child of a missionary woman, said, Mom, the people in the barrios know all about the life of the wealthy. They clean their floors, they do their dishes, cook, and so on. But the wealthy know very little about the life in the barrios. And I come across people all over who have never been in the barrios. But personal experience, just to let you know what it's like, one day, this was before the coup against Chavez, we're in a wealthy part of town, and we called a friend who doesn't like Chavez. And those times Chavez would call the opposition sometimes escuálido, which sounds like squalid, but it also means lightweight, not really having a lot of force. So anyway, here we called Bernardo, hey, you want to go out to supper with us? And Susana was driving the car, I was in the passenger seat, and he's coming walking toward, and Susana says, Epa, that's like, hey, Esqualido. And he has a big smile on his face, we're friends. But a woman, a well-dressed woman, stuck a pan in front of my face within the car and started beating on it. And I didn't know if she was going to bash me in the face with it or not. Caracas is, I think, the only airport in the world that had signs up that said, beating on tray tables will not be permitted in airplanes, okay? Because someone aligned with the government would get on a plane, and once they get up in the air, people would start beating on their tray tables. The same thing happened to Jimmy Carter after the referendum, when he said that the Carter Center said he felt was a fair referendum. And he went into a restaurant in a wealthy area. And so there's that, and actually just within, when was it, in September, there was a group down to look at elections from a group from the United States, a group of users. And we were in a restaurant, 9, and someone recognized this professor who was with us. He was from Argentina. And there was also an author of a book, Eva Gollinger. But this woman recognized this professor, and suddenly the people behind us were just screaming at us. And get out of here, and all kinds of stuff, and called us names. So they called us Cuban, assassins, Argentinians. Someone said I should have got up and said, hey, look, Cuban was one thing, Argentine, but don't, assassin one thing, but don't you dare call me an Argentinian, you know. But anyway, all I'm saying is there is that tension, and it's still there, and it hurts me. I don't know what the president can do. I wish that everyone would, be able to. What's happening though is a lot, I read in the newspaper, a lot of wealthy people are migrating to Miami. If you have property there, I would suggest sell it at the best price you can, move to Venezuela, and you won't have to put up with their complaining and experience democracy.
But there is another segment, there's kind of a new elite, and this has become an issue of debate in Venezuela. Sometimes call them Bali socialists. There are people who still have connections to the government, and if you go to, I was amazed I was in Caracas in the 80s when things were so bad, I'm sure Charlie remembers this, that after dark, the streets, there would be no one on the street. I couldn't believe I was in the same city I was in the 70s and the 80s, because there was, people couldn't afford to go out, and because they were afraid of crime, and it was just like the city was dead at night. I couldn't believe it. Well, then last summer I'm in Venezuela, and I was thinking about that because I've seen sushi restaurants, people are driving SUVs, because actually this costs more than the comparable amount of gasoline in Venezuela. And the people with connections to government are still getting rich. But this is not entirely Chavez's fault. I mean, I think this is something that is very difficult to root out when you've got that many petrodollars flowing into the economy. And it's one of the things that a lot of the supporters of Chavez are saying, well, wait a minute, this is not, the revolution also should not be, there shouldn't be sort of like two processes going on. One, a very positive one in the Barrios, while these other people are getting wealthy. Now, but there's a positive side to this too, because it means that there are some people in the middle class and in the wealthier sections where suddenly they may not like Chavez, but it's like, hey, my restaurant's doing a good business, right? Or I can now afford to go to the beach on the weekend, whereas maybe I couldn't afford the gasoline back in the worst days of the 80s, right? So there's two sides of it. One side of it is a kind of tension within the country, particularly among the strongest supporters and most active supporters of the president, who are saying that, well, wait a minute, you ought to do something about this. It's not fair. Why should there's this new generation of rich people springing up, and it's corruption, or it's, the connections to government. And it would be interesting to see how Chavez deals with that. He's making some institutional changes. I think he's well aware of it, and the government's well aware of the shortcomings. But at the same time, as I said, it also makes a little bit more complicated, the situation, because you do have certain sectors of kind of new elite who also are, have done well with their connections. I don't know if you...
But I would say the old elite is still doing all right. That's true. But there are situations like, let's say there's a conference in Caracas, and you see indigenous people in the Hilton Hotel, which you never saw before. The petroleum company owns a garden in the center of town at La Estancia. It's a beautiful garden, occupies a lot of space. And up to a couple years ago, 6,000 people a year entered that garden. Today, 40,000 people a month enter it. There's free concerts on Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning. You can go in there anytime you want to. That doesn't answer your question, but it's just, one of those things that pops in my mind about the difference. And so even if you're not earning a lot of money, you can go in and just have a nice, peaceful afternoon in a space where you never could before.
I just wanted to add one last thing about the opposition. I think it's really interesting what we're seeing now actually with the opposition, because since Chavez came on the scene, the opposition has been made up and led by sort of a group of like foaming at the mouth, rabid dog. My only program on the campaign trail is I want Chavez out. And there's no real political program or where they want the country to go, et cetera, except get rid of Chavez. And I think, over time with the failed coup, with the failed oil strike, which is more like an oil lockout, with the failed referendum on their part, I think, the international community as well as domestic population has come to see that that program and platform doesn't work, and that they need to come up with something new. And so you had, up until just this December election, every other vote, national vote cast in Venezuela that reaffirmed the population's support for Chavez was always by the opposition. They claimed that it was fraudulent, that it was not free and fair, etc., even though the Carter Center, the OAS, the European Union, etc., all said that otherwise. In this election, for the first time, the opposition presidential candidate, Rosales, actually said, we accept this, we had our people there, we see that it was a free and fair vote, and I think now there's some understanding in the opposition that they actually have to start to devise a real program if they want to actually gain votes and lead their country forward and pose a real challenge to Chavez in the next election. So I think there's actually some interesting developments that could happen, and it hopefully will drive them to think a little bit more and get more serious with what they want to do with the country if they want to have any stake in the future.